Certainly a budget of massive interest. Then, as we keep speaking about that debt trajectory figure, of course, big numbers on that front. South Africa may even see its debt go all the way up to around 140.7% by 2028-2029. So that picture certainly tells you, as my colleague Busisiwe Jemsana Mantashe told you there, it gets worse. It goes from debt to more debt to even more debt. In fact, this is what that trajectory looks like, 140.7% if South Africa just takes a look at the passive scenario. Now let's explain this a little bit. That passive scenario speaks to government leaving the debt scenario as it currently stands. So ultimately it means that they won't work too hard in trying to fix that debt picture, and this is how far it will rise. By the time it gets to 106% in the 2023-2024 year, that's about 3 years from now, South Africa will officially be in a sovereign debt crisis. That means we will have more debt than we have in terms of value as a country, which means we may then need to go to the International Monetary Fund and ask them to give us some money at that point in time. And borrowing more money is not the aim. It's not what we're looking to do at a time like this. Of course, some may even say that at that point we may need to try to get ourselves into a scenario where we're perhaps just printing more money, a scenario that the South African Reserve Bank has continued to say we will not engage in at present. So here's the rise then. 140.7% is of GDP. As a percent of GDP is where that figure will go just by 2029. We're sitting in 2020 and the 2021 fiscal year, so 8 years' time. That's how bad things could be. But government is hoping that indeed by 2023-2024 we could stabilize the debt picture for the country and get back to 87.4%, which is only slightly higher than the 81.8% that they're expecting in this fiscal year. So this picture rises then from that 63.5% that we had attained back in February as that picture for the 2019-2020 period. So this continues to just go, and hopefully that stabilization does continue to happen. Let's continue this debt picture now and give you a sense of where things go to from here. Now, this is the kind of financial support even provided to the most part for some of the entities. The title not necessarily right in that front, but I wanted to really talk about these last graphs over here. That being the expenses, and this white graph over here actually being the revenue that South Africa makes. Unfortunately, that means expenses over the next year are bound to just increase, as you continue to see, while the revenue from these have certainly gone down. So that's certainly hurting South Africa's picture at this point in time. Let's continue with the next graph then as well, as we continue to kind of see where things are coming to the active scenario outlook then for South Africa's picture. So real GDP, we experienced 1.9% growth, while last year we got 0.2% growth. This year, now goes that debt picture. South Africa, of course, already in that dreaded R word of a recession, minus 7.2% for 2020, but government expects that to bounce back quite nicely to 2.6%, a figure that we haven't had even in this picture over here. We haven't gotten our 2% growth rate in quite some time. To get it back to 2.6%, yes, it may be from a low base, but even this figure would certainly be one that we'd be happy with. 1.5% as well then for the remaining medium-term framework on that front there. So inflation also becomes quite significant. Government expecting inflation to be 3% for the remainder of this year, for all of this year, in fact, as the aggregate figure. Let's remember that today we also got the CPI figure coming out at 10 a.m. and that said to us that we're going to have inflation, or the month of April saw inflation come out at 3% already. So that means that was the lowest figure since 2005, June 2005 to be exact. So that's 15 years, the last time we saw a figure similar to 3% for our inflation target. But slowly, as the economy begins to build, as more people buy more things in the economy, that figure is expected to rise much higher to 4.5% there as well. And as you can see then, GDP prices are expected to drop off and hopefully begin to pick up all over again. Very finally then, let's get into our final graph here and get this debt picture. As I mentioned, revenue and expenditure here, not the picture we want. as we get the expenditure going much higher in this 2020-21, this gap over here is what creates the sovereign debt crisis for South Africa, and that's how we get ourselves into an absolutely sticky situation. Already the gap between the two has made things very difficult. South Africa would like, at the very least, for that yellow line to be at the same mark with that orange line, if not below it, because that will then mean that our expenses are less than our current debt picture as well. So as you can see, this is where we sit. This is the difficulty that South Africa sits with, unfortunately, at a time like this. This is the picture that Tito Mboweni is trying to alleviate and ensure that we don't have too difficult a time trying to fix. The sooner we fix this, the better for South Africa's economy. Let's head on over now to Peter Faber. Hopefully we get him now on board. He's from the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants to get more reaction on that supplementary budget. Peter, it was difficult. It certainly tells you then that it isn't easy at all for the Finance Minister to get things right here. But do you feel like you got enough of an answer as to where the money will come from?
Good evening. No, I don't think we got enough of an answer. I think what we have seen is the minister again identifying the right things and then telling us there's a plan that we know that they do nothing, and there's something that they will do something. And if they do something, there will be a significant change, including increased collections, growth in the economy. What we don't know is what are those things that he's talking about.
Yeah, in not offering any answers, does he leave room, I suppose, then for other things to come about? Do you think it's a case of planning a little bit more, or is this just a case of not perhaps coming up with the right kind of budget, or is he maybe leaving some things for what could be another medium-term budget policy statement in October?
Well, he affirmed that there will be a October medium-term policy statement. In fact, he said that the details of what this active plan will be given to us in October as well as in February. But it does leave questionably where they get the numbers. And I think the concerns are not in relation to the movements in the current year's budget. It's rather the medium-term estimates where we need to understand how we go from a 7% deficit to a 2.6% growth in GDP. And where the revenue growths are going to go, where we see jobs being lost, and those jobs are probably more permanent, not temporary.
Yeah, and he's even hoping then to somehow try and find a way to get some sort of positivity when it comes to trade, for example. Those figures are meant to give some sort of positivity as well. So we'll see how that fares. But Peter, he mentioned as well getting around 40 billion rand, I think, over the 3 years with regards to tax changes. And those will be announced, of course, at a later stage. What could those possibly be? A possible tax increase of sorts?
Well, the only things we can currently think that brings in, because the amounts were quite small. There were 5 billion for next year, escalating to 10 and 15 in the years thereafter. And the only things that generate such small amounts are, in fact, things like an additional band or a reduced bands for the current pay-as-you-earn and individual taxes. And the other, which is potentially is what National Treasury had estimated, about 5 to 7 billion for a wealth tax. So that's been bandied around as well. But they are small numbers in the bigger scheme of things.
Yeah, it's certainly, you're quite right on that front. Government also allocating 3 billion rand to try and recapitalize the land bank. Is that a cause worth saving, you reckon?
The land bank is actually one of the more profitable SOEs. I think it went more into a liquidity problem than a profitability. So that's probably one of the better investments in saving the land bank.
Yeah. All right. National debt, 81.8%. Is that a little optimistic? I know it seems it's obviously high from the 65% we currently sit at, but is it not going to get worse than the 4 trillion rand that government is expecting for this 2021 fiscal year?
I think that's exactly the problem. We don't know where those numbers come from. So if we even look at Moody's estimations already before COVID, they were sitting at 91% of GDP for debt by 2023. And that looked more realistic. Now we're seeing COVID, we're already jumping to 80% in 1 year, and we're still estimating 400 billion in revenue deficits for the years thereafter. So it just doesn't make sense how the tide turns, because at the end of the day, you need to spend less than what you're receiving for the debt to actually turn. And that's the plan we don't see. And in fact, if the GDP numbers and the revenue numbers are overstated, it means that the estimated debt numbers are going to be wrong as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've made the comment as SAICA in Parliament that in the last 5 or past years, revenue have actually been very bullish on what the growth numbers were going to be. And in fact, they have not realized those numbers in the last 5 years when you looked at the 3-year estimates.
35.3 billion rand behind in tax collection for the first 2 months of the 2021 fiscal year, Peter. Is there an ability to catch that up, though? And I'm only asking because, yes, tax revenue, of course, is going down, and you had the cigarette ban and the alcohol sales ban as well. But can you make that up by, increasing prices middle of the year? Does the PFMA allow for that?
Look, I don't think we're going to make those up. I think the losses that we made in the last 3 months are permanent. And we're probably going to see even more reductions or increases in unemployment, which means, and just remember that employees' tax is about a 40% plus contributor to that pool. So I don't think we're going to make it up. We're probably going to see a widening as the effects of the lockdown, etc., start hitting home.
Yeah, it does get very interesting from here on. Peter, appreciate the time. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very
Getting
much.
your perspective and your thoughts then as well on that budget data and budget figure, supplementary budget then from Finance Minister Tito Mboweni, having been released a little bit earlier on.